These past two episodes of the Acolyte show have been eventful, to say the least. I feel like you can't really review these two episodes apart because they both feel like two parts of what should have been an hour-long episode or a double release. I also feel like I need to say something about the overwhelming criticism that this show has been relentlessly getting these past few weeks. A 14% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is an insanely low representation of what I think the show deserves, and I think it's unfair to how good the show has been to us so far. Some of the biggest genuine criticisms of the show have been that it breaks the canon, has terrible writing, and terrible dialogue, which is honestly, I completely respect where people are coming from with criticisms of dialogue and writing, and I agree that in some instances, the dialogue is pretty cringy and the writing can be questioning sometimes. But at the same time, didn't the prequels struggle with the exact same problem? I am seeing a very similar trend with this show that happened with the prequels, that being the overwhelming amount of hate both got initially. Concerning the other popular criticism of the show regarding it breaking canon with Ki-Adi-Mundi and the Jedi encountering the quote-unquote Sith, I don't think this breaks canon at all. Ki-Adi-Mundi's age has only ever been revealed in Legends, which isn't canon to begin with. I still think it was an interesting decision to put him in the show, but it doesn't break canon in any way so far. Regarding the Jedi encountering the Darkseid user in Kofar, it hasn't broken canon just yet, and depending on how these next episodes go, it could or could not break canon. We'll see, I guess. If Sol survives and tells the Jedi of his encounter, the Phantom Menace will be partially retconned, where Ki-Adi-Mundi says that the Sith haven't existed for a millennium. I don't know if Osha will tell the Jedi about the encounter if she survives, and I think if Sol indeed had something to do with the death of the Coven, then Osha will definitely start hating the Jedi, so if that happens, I definitely don't think she'll be saying anything to the Jedi. May, on the other hand, already hates the Jedi, so she won't be spilling anything. Hell, she probably will end up killing Sol. Then there's that rodent dude, Basil, who follows May and Sol to the ship. Since he's an ally to some degree to the Jedi, I'm guessing he would probably tell them everything if he survives, so he needs to die as well. Now that I've gone over what this show will have to do to avoid breaking canon, let's get into the meat of these two episodes. We begin episode 4 with Kelnaka walking around his house, and the camera pans in on these markings on his wall, resembling the same markings that the witches have on their foreheads. Why does Kelnaka have these markings on his wall? Why did the show specifically show us these markings? I think it has something to do with his encounter with the witches on Brendok, which is probably why he went into exile in the first place. Also adding that Sol has a hard time telling Osha the truth of what happened that night of the fire and the guilt in his eyes. There is definitely something that the Jedi did that they feel guilty about. There's Torben, who got scarred up and took the Barrage vow for 10 years in search of forgiveness from May. Then there's also Kelnaka, who went into self-exile. There is definitely something more to this than we are led to believe. We get some yapping between Osha and Jeki, and then we see May and Kimir start their trek to hunt down Kelnaka. It is weird going back and watching this episode and seeing Kimir act so regular and friendly compared to what we see of him in the next episode. It reminds me so much of Palpatine and how he was able to hide in plain sight as the Chancellor. We then switch back to the Jedi, who are in a meeting, discussing the mission to retrieve Kelnaka before May finds him. We see Ki-Adi-Mundi, who seems disturbed about the question of who May's master might be. It's definitely a shock seeing Ki-Adi-Mundi this early in the timeline, but I'm not opposed to it at all. The Jedi then set course to Kofar, and they take Osha there so they can have an easier time getting to May. We see a Jedi who looks like Plo Koon, but that is not him. It's just another one of his species who is also a Jedi. The Jedi brought another person along who also isn't a Jedi and who has to be a civilian, like Osha, named Basil, who specializes in tracking. They let Basil smell a torn piece of Kelnaka's robe, and they follow him through the dark forest. In their trek through the forest, we see that there are these big bugs that fly around and eat people, which gives them all another thing to worry about besides May. Speaking of May, she ties up Kimir as an act of betrayal to her master, while, ironically, Kimir ends up being the one who is her master. May finds Kelnaka's house and sneaks inside, and it is revealed that Kelnaka has already been dead, showing the fresh lightsaber wound. It is a shame that we didn't see how Kelnaka dies, but it kind of adds to the tension and eeriness of this episode. The Jedi find May in the house, and they order her to come out. May feels her master's presence, and she doesn't leave, knowing that he is coming. We then see him levitate down behind Osha, which is pretty badass if you ask me. He ignites his lightsaber, force pushes Osha aside like she is nothing, and proceeds to force push all of the Jedi backwards as they all ignite their lightsabers and charge towards him, and the episode comes to a close. This guy has some serious aura to him and is definitely starting to become one of my favorite badass Darksiders. Episode 5 begins with Osha waking up after being knocked out by that force push at the end of the last episode. As she is waking up, we hear a soft melody of the Kylo Ren theme. Yeah, you got that right, the Kylo Ren theme. This is getting pretty interesting. This is one of the 2 times in the episode that I can recall them using this melody, suggesting that there is likely more to this Darkseid user than we are led to believe. I mean, you can kind of tell that just from the look of his armor that he is pretty similar to the Knights of Ren. Speaking of his armor, it is made from this cool metal called cortosis, which can absorb energy-based attacks like lightsabers, blaster bolts, and stun blasts, which is why all the Jedi's lightsabers keep turning off when they hit him. I'm glad we are seeing this being implemented now into canon, and I think it is a cool concept. Now, let's talk about the fighting in this episode, because this is some of the best fighting that I've seen since the prequels, and I mean that. The action in this episode honestly carried this 2-episode arc. This reminds me so much of when the Jedi confront Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. The Jedi are so powerless against the Stranger, and he takes them out with relative ease in a similar fashion that Palpatine kills the Jedi in Revenge of the Sith. Now, obviously, Palpatine is on a whole other level than this particular Darkseid wielder, predominantly because Palpatine is a real Sith Lord and had Plagueis for a master. And yes, I say that because I don't think this guy is a Sith at all. And the only reason he tells Soul that Jedi like him may call him a Sith is because that is the closest thing he could relate to that Soul would understand. I think this guy is either another Dark Jedi or simply a Darkseid user that isn't a Sith Lord, like Maul, Ventress, or Savage Opress, just to name a few. But it is a cool thing seeing a powerful Darkseid user again who is absolutely butchering the Jedi. I mean, look how he turns these 2 Jedi into a kebab, then slices their heads off. Are you not entertained? While Soul is fighting the Stranger, he asks Soul if he remembers him, suggesting that they have met before. Later in this episode, it is revealed that Yord also recognizes this guy. This suggests that the Stranger has some sort of relation to these 2, and we will probably see what that is in the next episodes. It is impressive that Jeki is able to hold her ground against the Darkseid user for as long as she does, until unfortunately getting shanked 3 times. I mean, as sad as it is to see a cool character get off like that, I'm kind of rooting for the Darksider here because these Jedi cannot live to tell the secret of the Sith. To me, this isn't just a battle against the Jedi, it's a battle to preserve the canon in Star Wars. It is revealed that the Stranger is actually Kemir, which I don't think was that much of a shocker, knowing that he was in the forest at the same time. I like that it is Kemir behind the mask because the way that he has been able to conceal his true identity from everyone is so similar to how Plagueis and Palpatine conceal their identities. Yord tries his best to fight Kemir, but unfortunately dies as well after he gets his neck snapped. I have bad news, guys. It is no longer Yordan time. Rest in power, King. Then Soul proceeds to destroy Kemir in hand-to-hand combat and comes super close to killing him, but Osha reminds him that killing him is not the Jedi way. Osha plants a flashlight on Kemir's back and he gets swarmed by those flying death bugs. Then Mei shows up and stuns Soul, and the 2 twins have a bit of a reunion. They still can't get along after all these years, and Mei knocks Osha out and disguises herself as Osha so she can presumably confront and kill Soul. We switch back to Kemir, who has killed a countless amount of those bugs, and he approaches Osha, who is still knocked out. He notices her wound, and I'm pretty sure he force heals it. I'm not mad about this instance of force healing because it is pretty normal for the Darkseid users to heal themselves or others. In fact, that's how people like Vader and Maul were able to survive their what would be normally fatal injuries. Kylo Ren's theme plays here for the 2nd time in this episode that I can recall, and this time it is a lot more prominent and obvious.
We are.
There is definitely a connection with Kylo Ren and Kemir that the show is heavily implying, and I am all for it. I hate the sequels, but I'm all for shows trying to expand the lore and making them more interesting. I'm guessing Kemir is going to have some role in the Knights of Ren, that being either creating it or having a big influence on it. The idea of the Knights of Ren being another sect of the dark side that is operating in the background unnoticed is pretty interesting to me, and I'm excited to see what direction that goes. Well, I definitely like these 2 episodes, and I still think this show is going strong. It is unfortunate that so many people are willing to judge this show well before it is completely released. Because of this, I feel like a lot of the criticism for this show is kinda unfair, but you know what? It is what it is. There are still a lot of people out there who are willing to give the show a chance, and many of those people also like the show or at least don't hate it as much as I see everywhere online. My hope is that these next 3 episodes give a strong close to the season and change many people's minds about the show as a whole. And regarding the accusations of the show breaking canon, I completely disagree with that. I think this show is walking a narrow line with breaking it, but I don't think it has actually broken canon yet. If the canon does end up being broken, then of course I will have something to say about that in my next video, which will be out after the show is concluded. Regardless of if you like or dislike The Acolyte, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Feel free to comment down below your thoughts of the show so far and what y'all think of Kymir's connection to Kylo Ren. I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and this is Narf Boy saying bye. Bye!